You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've just watched as a federal judge took not only a defiant stand in court against the Trump administration, but did something that could really have severe consequences for the Trump administration, for the Department of Justice specifically in the future. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, a big decision, a big ruling was just handed down in the New York City Mayor Eric Adams' corruption case. You'll remember he was indicted and was pending trial on multiple public corruption counts, bribery, conspiracy, wire fraud. And remember, Donald Trump's dirty DOJ swooped in and said, you know what? We want to dismiss the criminal case against Eric Adams. Why? Not because he didn't commit these crimes, not because there's a deficiency in the evidence or the legal theory of the prosecution, but we want him to help Donald Trump with his political priorities. Can I tell you, Brian, we don't make prosecutorial decisions to prosecute or decline to prosecute somebody for political gain to the President of the United States. But that is what Donald Trump's dirty DOJ, specifically a guy named Emil Bove, did. Judge Ho, the presiding judge, said, wait a minute, not so fast. I need to take some time. I need to hold a hearing and see if this is kosher. That's not a legal term. That's my word. And so what Judge Ho did after a hearing is he issued a 78-page ruling. I've read the whole thing, so our viewers don't have to. And he said a couple of things that are really consequential. First of all, he said, okay, DOJ, you want to dismiss this case temporarily, what's called without prejudice, so you can hang it over Mayor Eric Adams' head, so he'll be a good little mayor and do exactly what Donald Trump wants him to do? No, denied. And the judge said, I will dismiss it with prejudice, meaning you can't hold it over his head, you can't use it as political leverage, and you can never rebring these criminal charges against Mayor Eric Adams. But then he said a second thing that was also really consequential. He said, and your reasons, DOJ, Emil Bove, the lawyer who was representing the Department of Justice in this case, your reasons are unethical. And here's how he explained it. He said, first of all, you said that, this is some kind of election interference, and he went through, dozens of pages of analysis, and he shot that down. And he said point blank, that claim is pretextual. That is a nice word. Let me translate it from judge speak to English. It's a lie. That means, that will be very damaging when Emil Bove has to face New York Bar Council, and he will. We'll talk about why that is in a minute. And he said, the second thing is even worse. You want to use a criminal prosecution as political leverage, and that is unprecedented in my experience, and it is dead wrong. Let me read you just a couple of lines from this 78-page ruling. Here's what the judge said. He said, ethics rules prohibit such political considerations in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion, and DOJ's argument, Emil Bove's arguments, trigger concerns regarding political favoritism in prosecutorial decision-making. And I'll tell you, he blasted, that is how the AP reported it, he blasted these DOJ lawyers for doing something that was just flat out unethical. Now, at the end of the day, he did dismiss the case against Eric Adams permanently, and that is really all he could do. It's unfortunate because the people of New York, in a very real sense, were the victims of these alleged crimes for which Eric Adams had been indicted. But, Judge Ho had to saw the justice wood in front of him, and really his only option was to dismiss it with prejudice or without prejudice. He couldn't refuse to dismiss it because judges typically don't have prosecutors they can appoint to bring in as outside counsel and prosecute a case if the Department of Justice refuses to do so.
Now, Glenn, do any of as the result of Judge Ho's move here, of his opinion here, does that make it more likely that some of these Justice Department officials are going to shoulder some personal liability in the future?
Yeah, it is all but certain that today's opinion by Judge Ho will strengthen the ethics complaints that have already been filed for this very case against Emil Bove. They were filed by a New York State senator. They were filed by American Oversight, a nonprofit organization. They were filed by U.S. senators, White House, and Blumenthal, and others. but they were just allegations at that point when these complaints were filed some time ago that it looked like Emile Beauvais had been engaged in unethical conduct. Now, the judge has basically found that that is the case. So when this ethics investigation and the ultimate ethics hearing is conducted against Emile Beauvais, I have to believe he may be done with his lawyering days.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we're not going to see any pushback from the DOJ itself because the DOJ unto itself is inherently corrupt. I mean, Pam Bondi is not going to do anything. We already know that Pam Bondi isn't even lifting a finger for Signalgate, which is a worse issue than the very thing that Republicans basically predicated their entire identity on for the last decade, which is their opposition to Hillary Clinton's unsecured email server. And now already we have Pam Bondi who's come out and said that she's not going to do a single thing about Signalgate. So we already know that the justice does not survive in this DOJ. But when it comes to the bar, for example, these people are not folks who are beholden to this administration. And so is there a higher likelihood then that we'll actually see some actual accountability, at least as it relates to their ability to continue practicing law?
Yeah, undoubtedly. It's nice that we have, 50 state bar counsel out there that can, independent of the Department of Justice, actually do the right thing, conduct full, fair ethics investigations and hold attorneys accountable, sanction them, disbar them if appropriate. And they can do that without any interference from the Department of Justice. That's, one of the few points of light is we do have states, we have attorneys general, we have state prosecutors and state bar counsel that are stepping into the void left by DOJ's refusal to enforce the rule of law against Donald Trump, or it seems any of their own DOJ leadership or lawyers.
Now, in terms of Judge Ho's decision to buck what the White House clearly wanted it to do, which was to dismiss without prejudice so that they could continue to dangle this over Eric Adams' head, what do you think the backlash for Judge Ho is going to be now that he dared exercise his own autonomy as a judge and do something in stark opposition to what the God King wanted him to do?
If past is prologue, we can expect Donald Trump to lash out and call him a radical judge this and a compromised judge that, none of which is true. If people really want to see Judge Ho's scholarship, his thoughtfulness, read that 78-page ruling. It really is a wonderful piece of judicial craftsmanship, and it's unassailable in its reasoning and in its legal support. But here's the other thing, Brian. This is not a ruling that goes directly against Donald Trump, so he may let this one roll off because it's not calling him out personally. Sure, it may call out some of his DOJ officials, but what does he care? When has he ever been loyal to anybody but himself? So we may actually see radio silence regarding this judicial decision rather than the typical 2 a.m. unhinged social media post with, bad grammar, improper punctuation, and way too many caps.
Well, really, the ultimate winner here, I'm sad to say, looks like it is Eric Adams, because not only did he have his case dismissed, but the judge also prevented the Trump administration from being able to use the prospect of rebringing this case as leverage on his head. So he gets away with it, and he has no leverage. He doesn't owe anything to the Trump administration, or at least, not overtly. And so, if anybody really came out on top here, it's Eric Adams.
Yeah, and if anybody came out the losers here, it's the people of New York who are supposed to be represented by, an honest, ethical, law-abiding mayor of their city. That's obviously not the case. But the other thing I'll say is, what we learned during this litigation is the prosecutors were preparing to actually return another indictment, what we call a superseding indictment against Eric Adams beyond the conspiracy, bribery, and wire fraud charges. They were about to indict him for obstruction of justice, witness tampering. It's not completely out of the realm of possibilities that when a new law-abiding administration comes into power, it could be that they will bring those federal charges. And let's not forget, New York has state court prosecutors in Alvin Bragg and company, and they have certainly stepped in to the void left by a corrupt DOJ before, and they could certainly explore whether Eric Adams violated New York state laws as part of these crimes he was indicted for federally.
And that's what I was just going to ask is, we know that the DOJ, if the DOJ was working on a superseding indictment, Is it possible that the DOJ could have, in advance of Trump taking office, in advance of Pam Bondi taking over the DOJ, that the Biden DOJ could have transferred some of the information that was contained within the superseding indictment to state prosecutors, knowing full well that Pam Bondi's DOJ, that Trump's DOJ, would never move on this? And so if they want to, A, preserve the work that they did, and B, actually get it in front of prosecutors who would be willing to prosecute him, is it possible that they could have given all the information they need to someone like Alvin Bragg already?
Possible, but I'm going to say not likely. The reason I say not likely is because that was still an investigation in progress, and I can tell you from my experience as a career prosecutor, we ordinarily don't take evidence that's part of an ongoing investigation and transfer it to other prosecutorial authorities. We wait until we've got the indictments returned. We generally wait until the conclusion of the trial, and then if there are state charges in play, we'll package it up and give it to the state. So I think it's possible, but not likely.
Okay, and finally, I have to ask, is this the end of the whole Eric Adams saga, at least as it relates to the charges that were on the table and that he had been indicted on the first go-around?
I think the answer is yes, but here is sort of an outlier of a possibility. If the Department of Justice is upset enough with Judge Ho's ruling that he's dismissing this case with prejudice, so these charges can never be rebrought, I don't expect that as something that can or would be appealed, but this Department of Justice could always gin up other charges, indict Eric Adams anew, and hang those over his head. I certainly wouldn't put that past this,
I mean, there's a world in which they can look at the case that the DOJ was building for the superseding indictment, knowing full well that if they need something to dangle over his head, that they have that in their back pocket.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that past this, ugly, law firm that has emerged as part of DOJ leadership of Bondi, Blanche, and Beauvais, all doing Donald Trump's bidding, all, interestingly enough, Donald Trump's former attorneys.
Well, we will, of course, stay on top of any updates we get on this case in particular, but also the legal landscape more broadly. For those who are watching, if you want to support our work and support independent media more broadly, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.